for the quiz on Tuesday, remember it's going to be over everything in Lab 4, which includes the blood stuff that we did before, and then also the heart stuff that we're doing today. So here's the heart stuff. I know it looks, I know, it's daunting. Come on, you guys are up for it.
That's
You can
gross.
do this.
I need a new prescription.
You can do this. Again, the sheep heart thing, you will need to know it for the practical, but you don't need to know it for the quiz. So I'm not even going to review the sheep heart now. I will review it on Tuesday, okay? But just be aware of that. So, first off, so this is a picture then, an artist drawing of the pericardium. We don't have any good models that show the pericardium in this kind of detail, so I'd have to use a picture similar to this one, or like the one I showed you during the PowerPoint. So let me just run through these layers then. This outermost layer here, that's going to be the fibrous pericardium. That's the thing that's like a tough leather sac. Then this layer directly attached to it would be the parietal layer of the serous pericardium. And then obviously this is going to be the space, the pericardial cavity or the pericardial space, whatever you want to call it. And then this layer here is the one that goes by two names. You could call it the visceral layer of the serous pericardium, or you could just call it the epicardium. Then as you get into the heart wall itself, the heart wall is made up of the epicardium plus the myocardium plus the endocardium, which is that layer that's like pulled back. All right, now let me go to the model.
It's not what you think. Just a picture.
So here's our heart, and just to go through the important stuff here, kind of working from outside to in. This pointy part down here would be called the what? Apex, and then kind of this flat part back here would be the base, okay? The pericardium I already showed you. The pericardium is not on any of the models. They've already removed it from the models, so that's why I got to use a picture. Adipose. So you saw, for those of you that did the sheep heart, you saw that there's a lot of fat on the front and the back of the heart. The way it works is the fat kind of covers up and protects the blood vessels. So let me walk you through this. There are grooves on the heart that these blood vessels fit into. Those grooves, of course, in A&P world, they can't just be called grooves. They're called sulci. Remember the word sulcus or sulci from the brain, right? Sulcus just means groove. So on the front of the heart, there's a groove here called the anterior interventricular sulcus, and some blood vessels will fit in that. And then on the back, there's a groove back here called the posterior interventricular sulcus. Some blood vessels will fit in that. And then also going across here, there's a coronary sulcus, and the blood vessels will also fit in that. After the blood vessels are in, then fat is laid on top of it to kind of protect it. On these models, they remove the fat, but you could see the fat on the sheep hearts, right? Now, the major blood vessels, just again working myself from out to in, and this is kind of why the sheep hearts suck, is they cut so many of these away because they just cut too close to the heart itself. But let me walk you through this. This guy going up here is the superior vena cava. This guy down here that they sort of cut off in the model, that would be where the inferior vena cava is. Notice that both of them empty into your right atrium. Okay? This is bringing deoxygenated blood from your head, your neck, your upper extremities, your trunk. This is bringing deoxygenated blood from your lower extremities and your pelvis and your abdomen. And then this little thing that you see here that doesn't look like much, that little dot, that's actually the opening of the coronary sinus, which is this guy in the back. So that's bringing all the deoxygenated blood from the heart muscle itself. So all deoxygenated blood is being dumped into this right atrium, okay? I'll go through the chambers in a second. Other big blood vessels that you can see coming right off the front of the heart, this is the pulmonary trunk. It's carrying deoxygenated blood towards the lungs. The pulmonary trunk is going to divide into a left pulmonary artery and into a right pulmonary artery. Again, they're arteries because they're carrying blood away from the heart, but they're blue because they're carrying deoxygenated blood. The blood will then go out to the lungs, it'll pick up oxygen, then it's going to come back to the heart using these four guys. These are the pulmonary veins. Again, on the stupid sheep heart, they cut so damn close to the thing that all you saw was one big hole in the back instead of seeing those 4 branches. But those are the pulmonary veins. Veins, because they're taking blood to the heart, but they're red because they're carrying oxygenated blood. Okay. These guys, all 4 of them, they dump into the left atrium. So let me pull this apart again. So here's the inside of the left atrium, right? The blood then gets pumped out of the left ventricle and goes up through the aorta. So this is the aorta. Technically, as the blood is going up, this is called the ascending aorta. Then as the aorta curves over, it's called the arch of the aorta. And then, as you'll see in the next lab, it starts to go downward, and then it's called the descending aorta at that point. These 3 guys that come off, you don't really need to worry about those branches yet. You will need to know them after the next blood vessel lab, so let me just tell you what they are, and you can store it away for later. This first branch is called the brachiocephalic artery. The next is called the left common carotid artery, and then the last one is called the left subclavian artery. Okay. Those guys are not the first branches off of the aorta, though. If you want to see the first branches off the aorta, and I guess it's a good time as any to talk about them, you have to kind of pull this heart apart, and you have to look a little closer. This little guy that doesn't look like anything, that's the right coronary artery. And then over here, this little guy that doesn't look like much, that's the left coronary artery. They're actually the first branches that come off of the aorta. Okay. Now, speaking of the coronaries, let me put this back together and go through the branches of each. So, this is the continuation of the right coronary artery that you see here. And then this branch that goes down here, that's called the marginal artery. And then this branch that continues around the back and then goes down the back, that's called the posterior interventricular branch, or the posterior interventricular artery. Okay? So those are branches off the right coronary. Off of the left coronary artery, well, first of all, you can't really see the branch point because the left auricle is in the way, but you can see the branches nonetheless. So this is the big one. This is the anterior interventricular branch, or it's also known as the left anterior descending, or you can just call it the LAD. And then this guy that's curving around here is called the circumflex artery. Okay? Those are the main coronary arteries. For the veins, these veins that you have here, this is the great cardiac vein. It's basically following right next to the LAD. On the back side, you have this guy, which is the middle cardiac vein that kind of follows alongside of the posterior interventricular artery. And then you have a bunch of these little veins kind of coming off the front here. Those are the small cardiac veins. And then remember, all of the veins eventually meet up on the back side of the heart at this big guy, and that's the coronary sinus. All the deoxygenated blood from the heart gets collected at the coronary sinus, and then as I showed you earlier, it's going to dump into the right atrium along with the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Okay. Sure, moving along here. It's time. Okay.
2 times.
Other stuff to see, to point out before I look, I do want to look on the inside, but I want to make sure I cover everything outside. This, I'm about to fall off my chair. This dumb thing here that you probably didn't even notice until I pointed it out is something you need to know. That little dumb thing there, that's called the ligamentum arteriosum. It's just tissue. It's just tissue in an adult. But in the fetus heart, it's actually a passageway that connects the pulmonary trunk with the arch of the aorta. It's another bypass route that allows blood to not go to the lungs. In a fetus, you'll learn this later, but in a fetus it's called the ductus arteriosus, and it's actually open. In an adult, it closes off, and then they just call it the ligamentum arteriosum. Okay? All right. Heart wall layers, I already showed that to you. Heart chambers then. So, just to back it up, this is the right atrium over here. That's where the collecting area is for kind of the deoxygenated blood. All of it gets dumped there. Then you go through this guy here. This is the, sorry, it's kind of bright. I'm just coming out of the brightness. Okay. This is the right AV valve, or you can also call it the tricuspid valve. Notice these little things that you see here, those are called the chordae tenonnae. The chordae tenonnae are attached to little muscles that are in the wall of the ventricles. This one actually tore off, but you can see how this one's still attached here. Those are called papillary muscles. Those are the anchor spots for the chordae tenonnae. Before I go too much further, there is a pattern of muscle on the inside of the ventricles too. Not the chordae tenonnae, but just the pattern that you see there, or if you look on this piece, you can kind of see the pattern of muscle here and here. That pattern of muscles that you see on the ventricles, that's called the trabeculae carnae. Whatever. All right. Inside the atria, there's also a similar pattern of muscles on the inside of the atria, but they of course have a different name for that. Those are called the pectinate muscles that are on the inside of the atria. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Back to the chambers. Right atria, tricuspid valve, right ventricle, up through the pulmonary valve, also known as the right semilunar valve. Then you're into the pulmonary trunk, then you're into the pulmonary arteries, out to the lungs, picks up oxygen, comes back to the heart using the 4 pulmonary veins, dumps into the left atrium, which is here. The blood then goes through the bicuspid valve, also known as the left AV valve, also known as the mitral valve. It also has chordae tenonnae, also has papillary muscles. And then the blood gets pumped up through this valve, which is the aortic valve, also known as the left semilunar valve, and then you're going to be in the aorta going out there. There's a wall that separates the atria from each other. That's called the interatrial septum. And that's where you'd have, kind of shown in white here, that's where you'd have a little hole in the fetus heart called the foramen ovale. It should close off in an adult heart, but there's still a little indentation there that's called the fossa ovalis that you should see. Okay? This big thick divider that you see here, that's the interventricular septum, and you can see it's a lot wider than the atrial septum. It's kind of hard to see atrial septum, but basically in between my fingers would be the interatrial septum. One thing to note is make sure you can identify your chambers, and I was trying to explain to these guys over there, sometimes it can be tricky because you don't know if somebody's showing you an anterior part of the heart, or a posterior part of the heart. This is the posterior part of the heart, and on the posterior part of the heart, right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. But, you know, don't be tricked, like, well, wait a second. Oh shoot, that's the anterior half of the heart. Now you gotta kind of reverse your thinking. This is gonna be the right atrium up here. This is all right ventricle down here. This is left atrium up here, and then that's left ventricle. My advice, and I try to mention it to these guys over here, is if you don't know which side you're looking at, look at the thickness of the outer wall of the ventricle. Wherever it's thicker is going to be where the left side is. So compare the thickness here with the thickness over there. It's thicker over there, so that's telling you that this is the left side. This is the left ventricle, and then over here is the right ventricle. It's always thicker on the left side. And that rule holds if I'm showing you an anterior piece of the heart like this, or if I'm showing you this posterior part. You know, first look at the outer wall thickness. That will tell you where left is. So it's thicker over here than it is over there. So this is left over here, and that's right over there. Okay? All right. Make sure you can trace a drop of blood through the heart. Refer to that one diagram. You know, I will tell you, like, oh, you're starting in the right ventricle. What structures would you pass to go from the right ventricle to the left ventricle? And you'll have to tell me everything. Or I might just say, like, tell me the valves that you would cross in order as you go from the right ventricle to the left ventricle, and you have to tell me the valves in order. If you want to write out everything you pass, because that's the only way you can think of it, that's okay, but you got to make sure you have the valves in the right order. Okay?
Are you doing it in order now?
What's that?
Are you going to put it in order now?
Am I going to put them in order now?
Yeah.
For the video, do it.
Oh, for the video, sure.
That'd be
Right, so
great.
blood comes into the right atrium, goes through the tricuspid valve. Then it's in the right ventricle, goes through the pulmonary valve. Then it's in the pulmonary trunk. Then it's in the pulmonary arteries. Then it's in the lungs. Then it comes back through the pulmonary vein. Then it's in the left atrium. Then it goes through the bicuspid valve. Then it's in the left ventricle. Then it goes out through the aortic valve and into the aorta. Easy peasy, lemon
you.
squeezy. All right. Now, quickly, I know I'm running out of time. Here is cardiac muscle. Again, if you squint, you should see little striations. I'll admit it's kind of hard on this. These darker lines that you see, though, those are the intercalated discs, and you'll only see that in cardiac muscle, okay? Here's a better one that shows the striations a little bit better. So all the little stripes that you see everywhere, those are the striations, and then the darker lines that you see are the intercalated discs, okay? So that's a tip-off you're looking at cardiac muscle. Last thing you need to know from this lab is the parts of an ECG. You don't need to know yet, I'll explain this on Tuesday, but you don't need to know what the parts represent. You just need to be able to label them. So this first bump is called the P wave, and it goes in alphabetical order. Don't ask me why they started with the letter P. There's probably a reason for that. I've just not cared enough to look it up. Maybe I will sometime. Probably not though. All right, that's a P wave right there. Then this big sharp bump that you see there, that's the QRS complex. So P, QRS. What comes next? T, that's the T wave. And then lastly, what comes after T? U, that's the U wave there, all right? So P, QRS, T wave, and then the U wave, okay? Any questions about any of the stuff we covered?
So the sheet brain, you say you're not gonna go in depth with the practical. It's gonna be like maybe 1 or 2 questions.
There'll be like 1 or 2 questions, and I will review the sheet brain in class on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Yeah, sheet
Hard.
brain.
Sheet brain.
Yeah.
You said sheep brain.
Yeah.